They thought she was powerless. They thought she was just a maid, a shadow meant to clean up their mess and bow her head when called. But when the billionaire bullies grabbed her collar in front of the world, waiting to see her break, Zariah Monroe did something that silenced an entire ballroom of the world's richest and most ruthless. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She fought back. And what she did that night left even the mighty Delacroix Empire shaking. Because sometimes, the loudest roar comes from the one they tried hardest to silence. Money buys power. Money buys silence. Money even buys loyalty. But what happens when someone who has nothing, no fortune, no allies, no privilege, dares to stand against it all? Zariah Monroe was just a maid, but her dignity was worth more than all the gold in that ballroom. In a world where wealth ruled and cruelty was applauded, her defiance became the spark no billionaire could extinguish. This isn't just about romance. It's about power, hate, and the twisted way love can grow in the most toxic of soils. And tonight, you'll see how one woman's refusal to bow changed everything. Before we dive into this jaw-dropping story, I need you to pause for a moment and think. If you were Zariah, standing in front of a room full of billionaires, humiliated, your collar gripped by the man who thought he owned you, would you lower your eyes and take it, or would you risk everything and fight back? Drop your answer in the comments below. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds. Now let's begin. The chandeliers dripped with gold, their glass arms glittering above a sea of gowns and tuxedos. The Delacroix mansion was alive with music, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Billionaires and politicians mingled like gods, their arrogance dripping from every syllable. But beneath the shimmer and the perfume, there were shadows. Shadows who cleaned, shadows who served, shadows who were never meant to be seen. Zariah Monroe was one of those shadows. Her hands, raw from bleach and scrubbing, carried a silver tray of champagne flutes across the ballroom. No one looked at her face. No one thanked her. To them, she was invisible, an ornament in black and white, placed there for convenience. Invisible, until someone decided to remind her of her place. "Careful, maid!" A mocking voice slithered through the crowd. Zariah didn't need to look up to know who it was. Cassian Delacroix, the heir to the empire. A man born with diamonds in his crib and venom on his tongue. At his side stood his ever-loyal pack, Thierry, Victor, and Alaric, the so-called golden boys of wealth, dressed in tailored arrogance. Cassian's icy eyes lingered on her as though she had trespassed into his world by breathing the same air. "Isn't it funny?" Thierry smirked, his voice carrying over the music. "Even dressed in uniform, she thinks she belongs here. Tell me, do you even know how to hold a glass properly, or do you drink from plastic cups at home?" Laughter, cruel, sharp, slicing through the fragile dignity Zariah held on to. She kept walking, head high, tray steady, but Cassian wasn't done. In one fluid, deliberate motion, he stepped forward, blocking her path. His hand shot out, gripping the stiff collar of her maid's uniform, tugging her closer. Gasps scattered across the ballroom like sparks to dry grass. The music stuttered, eyes turned. For the first time that evening, the invisible maid was seen. Zariah's breath caught, not from fear, but from fury. Cassian leaned in, his lips curving into a dangerous smile. "Remember this, maid. You are ours. Every step you take in this house is because we allow it. Don't forget where you belong." The room went silent, all eyes locked on the humiliating scene. The champagne flutes trembled on her tray, her pulse thundering in her ears. They wanted her broken, they wanted her small. But Zariah Monroe was not built to bow. Her gaze snapped to his, dark and unflinching, a storm contained in a single stare. And then, she did something no one in that gilded room expected. Something that would shift the balance of power in ways the Delacroix Empire would never recover from. For a breathless second, the world stood still. Cassian's fist was tight around Zariah's collar, her starched black and white uniform wrinkling beneath his grip. Guests whispered behind jeweled hands, their diamonds glittering under the chandeliers as if the humiliation of a maid was their evening's entertainment. Cassian's friends chuckled cruelly. Thierry tilted his champagne flute toward the scene like it was a show. "Go on, Cassian. Teach the little maid what happens when she forgets her place." Victor's laughter was low and dangerous. "Rip that collar right off her neck. Maybe she'll learn humility then." Every eye was on her. They expected tears. They expected shame. They expected Zariah Monroe to crumble. Instead, she smiled. It wasn't the smile of a servant begging for mercy. It was sharp, deliberate, a dagger cloaked in calm. She lowered the tray of glasses to a nearby table with the grace of a queen setting down a crown, then slowly, deliberately, lifted her hand to Cassian's grip. Her voice was steady, deadly. "Take your hands off me." A ripple moved through the crowd. No one ever spoke to Cassian Delacroix like that. No one dared. Cassian's eyes narrowed. "What did you just say?" Zariah leaned closer, her words low but cutting enough for the entire room to hear. "I said, take your hands off me, because if you don't—" She paused, her lips curling into that same defiant smile. "The entire room will find out exactly what your father did last summer in Capri. And trust me, Mr. Delacroix, your empire won't survive it." The ballroom went silent. Not a breath. Not a murmur. Even the orchestra's violins faltered into silence. Cassian's grip loosened, his composure flickering like a candle in the wind. His father. Capri. Those words alone had drained the arrogance from his smirk. "Zariah!" he hissed, low enough for only her to hear. "You don't know what you're talking about." Her eyes burned into his. "Try me." She shoved his hand off her collar, her sudden force making him stumble back half a step too far for the proud heir who had never been defied in public. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Thierry's grin froze on his lips. Victor's hand twitched, as though itching for a fight. Alaric muttered under his breath, "What the hell just happened?" Zariah, the maid they never respected, had just turned the room upside down. And then, with the poise of a woman who refused to be broken, she picked up her tray of champagne again and walked through the parting crowd. Each step echoed louder than the music that struggled to resume, her presence heavier than the millions of dollars in that room. The whispers followed her. Did she just... What does she know? Capri? What happened in Capri? For the first time in his life, Cassian Delacroix wasn't laughing. His jaw was tight, his fists clenched at his sides. And though he said nothing, his eyes followed her retreating form like daggers. She had humiliated him, publicly, boldly, and no one humiliated a Delacroix without consequences. As she disappeared through the servant's door, Cassian whispered one chilling promise under his breath. "She will regret this night." The storm in Cassian's chest hadn't passed. Long after the guests whispered about the maid who dared humiliate a Delacroix, long after the orchestra tried to drown the scandal with frantic strings, Cassian was still replaying it in his head. Her eyes, her voice, her threat. Capri. The word had hit him like a blade to the gut. He sat alone in his father's private study, the heavy oak desk buried beneath contracts and ledgers, his untouched glass of brandy warming under the glow of the fire. His friends had long left, muttering curses about the audacity of the maid, but Cassian remained, haunted. She should have been nothing. Just another nameless servant, disposable, replaceable. So why did her defiance burn hotter in his veins than any insult ever hurled his way? Meanwhile, down in the servants' quarters, Zariah scrubbed her hands raw under the cold faucet. The smell of champagne and humiliation clung to her uniform, but her heart was steady. She had seen the fear in Cassian's eyes, fear disguised as rage, and she knew that tonight she had struck a chord too deep to be ignored. But her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Careful, Zariah. Power doesn't forgive humiliation. It strikes back harder. Zariah dried her hands and squared her shoulders. Let him strike, she whispered to herself. I'm not my mother. I won't bow. The following evening, Cassian found her again. It was in the west garden of the mansion, where she had been trimming roses under the sinking sun. The estate sprawled around them like a kingdom, its marble fountains and sculpted hedges mocking the hard labor that went unseen. Zariah heard the crunch of polished shoes on gravel before she even looked up. She didn't have to. The air shifted when he was near, cold, sharp, commanding. Still smiling, maid? Cassian's voice cut the air. Zariah straightened, pruning shears in hand, meeting his stare without flinching. Still sulking, Prince? His jaw tightened. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed yourself, she corrected, calm as steel. All I did was remind you that money doesn't make you untouchable. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. His cologne was sharp, expensive, suffocating. You think you won because you had the audacity to spit out a threat you can't back up? Her lips twitched, dangerously close to a smile. Try me. Something shifted in his eyes. Anger, yes, but beneath it, something else. Something darker, hungrier. Before she could move, Cassian's hand shot out, gripping the shears she held. He wasn't yanking them away. He was holding them with her, his fingers brushing hers, the contact sparking with unwanted electricity. For a man who had spent his life in control, the realization was like poison. He wanted her. Zariah yanked her hand free, the shears clattering to the ground. Her chest rose and fell sharply, but she kept her composure. Don't confuse fascination with dominance, Mr. Delacroix. I won't be your entertainment. Cassian's smirk returned, though weaker this time. You really believe I'd waste fascination on a maid? But the words betrayed him. His gaze lingered too long on her lips, too long on the fire in her eyes. Zariah bent to pick up the shears, her movements deliberate, regal even in her plain uniform. She didn't look at him when she spoke again. Be careful, Cassian. You might find yourself addicted to the very woman you think you own. For the first time, Cassian Delacroix didn't have a retort. That night, as Zariah lay in her narrow bed, she stared at the ceiling, furious with herself. Why did her skin still burn where his fingers had brushed hers? Why had her heart betrayed her, thundering in her chest when his eyes pinned her down? She hated him. She despised everything he stood for. And yet, beneath the fury, she couldn't deny it. Something dangerous had been ignited between them. The storm had come like a warning. Thunder rolled across the city, shaking the Delacroix estate to its foundations. Rain hurled itself against the mansion's windows like restless fists demanding to be let in. The glass chandeliers rattled, the wind moaned through the halls. But in the dim servants' quarters tucked deep beneath the mansion, Zariah Monroe sat perfectly still. Her narrow bed sagged beneath her weight as she clutched an old wooden box to her chest. The wood was scarred and splintered, smelling faintly of cedar and thyme. It was the only thing she had kept after her mother's death. Everything else, the laughter, the stories, the comfort of a voice that used to sing her to sleep, was gone. Zariah's hands shook as she lifted the lid. Inside lay her inheritance, faded photographs, brittle letters tied with string, and a delicate locket dulled with age. These fragments were all that remained of a woman who had lived and died in silence. Her mother had worked in this very house, cleaning floors Zariah now scrubbed, bowing her head to the same family who now mocked her daughter. But Zariah remembered the look in her mother's eyes whenever the Delacroix name passed her lips. Fear disguised as bitterness, sorrow disguised as warning. Her mother had carried something to the grave, something she had never dared to say aloud. Zariah untied the bundle of letters, her fingers trembling as the string gave way. They weren't addressed to anyone. They weren't dated. They were scraps of confession, poured onto paper in hurried, uneven strokes. The first letter was short, just a single page. If you are reading this, then I am no longer alive. There are things I cannot say out loud, not with eyes and ears always watching me. But understand this, my daughter. The Delacroix family does not forgive, and they do not forget. They destroy. I made mistakes with them, mistakes I fear you will one day pay for. Promise me, Zariah, you will never let them own you. Her throat closed. Tears threatened to spill, but she forced them back. She wouldn't cry. Not tonight. Not when the truth had only just begun to surface. She reached for another letter. This one was longer, the ink smudged as though her mother had been crying while writing. I was young when I came into this house, young and foolish. I believed I could endure anything if it meant survival. But survival in the Delacroix mansion comes with a price I paid with my body, my dignity, my silence. And when I tried to leave, they reminded me who truly held power. You must never trust them, Zariah. Not Leopold, not his heir, not anyone with the Delacroix name. They are men who will poison the air you breathe until you forget who you are. Zariah's hand tightened around the page until it nearly tore. Her mother hadn't just been a maid. She had been used. The fear she had carried, the bitterness in her voice. It all made sense now, and worse. If her mother had been bound to the family by force and silence, then Zariah working here wasn't coincidence. It was a curse. A cycle. The last envelope at the bottom of the box was sealed, the wax brittle with age. Zariah hesitated, then ripped it open. This letter was the shortest of them all. Just a handful of words written in an unsteady scrawl. Zariah, if the truth comes for you, remember this. Blood ties you cannot see are often the chains you cannot break. Her stomach dropped. Blood ties. What did that mean? Before she could piece it together, a knock rattled her door. Sharp, demanding. Zariah shoved the letters back into the box, her pulse racing. Who is it? The door opened without waiting for permission. Cassian Delacroix stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his black shirt, his hair plastered against his forehead. He looked like he had wrestled with the storm itself. You shouldn't be here, Zariah snapped, shoving the box under her bed. His eyes flickered toward the movement, sharp as a blade. He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. You know something, he said. His voice wasn't arrogant this time. It was edged with suspicion. I don't know what you're talking about, Zariah replied, forcing her tone to stay calm. Capri? His jaw clenched. When you said that in the ballroom, you weren't bluffing. You know something about my father. Her silence answered for her. Cassian took a slow step closer, his wet shoes squeaking against the wooden floor. Your mother worked here before, didn't she? That's how you know. Zariah's eyes narrowed. You remember her? He hesitated. For once, the perfect polished mask of Cassian Delacroix faltered. I was a boy, but yes. I remember my father saying her name, more than once. He said it like... He broke off, his lips curling with disgust. Like she was more than a servant. Zariah's blood boiled. She wasn't more than a servant. She was a human being your father broke, just like he breaks everything else he touches. Cassian's chest heaved. The storm outside roared louder, lightning spilling shadows across his face. He looked at her as if he wanted to deny it, to dismiss her mother's memory as exaggeration. But he couldn't. Something in his eyes betrayed him. "What do you think you know?" His voice was lower now, quieter. But it carried the weight of something dangerous. Zariah stepped forward, her chin raised, her voice a sharp blade against the silence. "I know enough to bring your father's empire to the ground, enough to make sure the world never looks at the Delacroix family with reverence again." Her heart pounded so hard it hurt, but she didn't flinch. Cassian's eyes locked on hers. For a long, suffocating moment, there was no sound but the storm. Finally, he whispered, "You don't understand what you're starting." Her reply was cold as steel. "No, Cassian, you don't understand what I'm finishing." The storm had passed by morning, but the mansion still groaned under its aftermath. Branches scattered across the long driveway, marble fountains overflowed with dirty rainwater, and the sky hung heavy with the gray weight of retreating clouds. Inside, life continued with the false perfection of the wealthy. Servants scurried about polishing silver and rearranging fresh flowers as if nothing had been touched, as if the storm hadn't clawed through the night. But Zariah Monroe felt the storm still raging inside her. Sleep had abandoned her. She'd spent the hours before dawn rereading her mother's letters, the words cutting deeper each time. Every truth inked on those fragile pages was now etched into her skin. She was her mother's daughter, but she would not share her mother's fate. The Delacroix family had stolen enough, and it was time someone stole back. Zariah stood at the tall window of her cramped servant's room, her fists pressed against the cold glass as she stared at the estate grounds. The manicured gardens, the gleaming cars, the towering house, all of it built on lies, cruelty, and silence. She whispered to herself, "You'll burn, Leopold, one secret at a time." A knock pulled her from her thoughts. It was Delphine, another maid, wide-eyed, trembling, her apron still damp from scrubbing floors. "You're wanted in the drawing room," she said quickly, almost breathless, "by the master himself." Leopold. Zariah's heart skipped, but she steadied her breath. She had been waiting for this. The drawing room was a masterpiece of wealth, velvet drapes, golden-framed oil paintings, and a fireplace so grand it could fit 3 men standing. Leopold Delacroix sat at the head of the room in a high-backed chair, dressed in a perfectly pressed suit, though it was barely after sunrise. Cassian stood behind him, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Zariah stepped inside, spine straight, face neutral. Leopold's eyes, a shade too sharp, too cold, studied her. "You've been making quite the impression in my household." His tone was smooth, but the danger in it was unmistakable. Zariah lowered her gaze just enough to play the role of the servant, though inside she seethed. "I do what's asked of me, sir." A smile curved his lips, cruel and humorless. "Is that what you call it? Stirring rumors? Whispering things you shouldn't know?" Her chest tightened. Cassian had told him. Leopold leaned forward, resting his elbows on the carved arms of the chair. "Let me be clear, Miss Monroe. This house thrives on loyalty. Disloyalty, however, is disposed of. Are we understood?" Zariah met his gaze then, unflinching. Her voice was calm, but each word dripped with quiet fire. Crystal clear. Leopold's smile widened as though amused by her defiance. He dismissed her with a flick of his hand, but as she turned to leave, Cassian's voice broke the silence. "Father." Leopold glanced up. "Yes?" Cassian's jaw tightened. His eyes flickered toward Zariah, then back to his father. "Perhaps you should remember not everyone bows as easily as you'd like." For the first time, Leopold's smile faltered. Zariah froze. Her breath caught. Cassian had just risked something, though she couldn't yet tell if it was for her or against his father. Back in her quarters, she paced like a caged animal. Leopold's threat had only fueled her fury. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. She thought of the locket at the bottom of the box. Inside it was a photograph. Her mother as a young woman standing with another man. Not Leopold, not a servant, someone else. His features were blurred with age and fading ink. But there was something familiar. Zariah's stomach twisted. Could this be what her mother meant by blood ties? If she could prove the Delacroix family had more skeletons in their closet than anyone knew, if she could show the world the hypocrisy behind their empire, Leopold wouldn't be able to silence her. Not without burning everything he'd built. But proof wasn't enough. She needed allies. And right now, there was only one person who had shown even the smallest crack in their loyalty to Leopold. Cassian. She found him in the stables later that afternoon, away from the eyes of the household. He was brushing down his black stallion, the same precision and discipline in his movements as in everything else he did. Zariah stepped inside, the smell of hay and leather thick in the air. "Why did you defend me?" she asked without preamble. Cassian's hand stilled on the horse's mane, but he didn't turn. "I didn't defend you. I warned him." Her eyes narrowed. "Warned him of what?" "That you're not someone he should underestimate." Finally, Cassian turned, his gaze locking with hers. "But don't mistake me, Zariah. I don't trust you, and you shouldn't trust me." She tilted her head. "Then why are you still here? Why haven't you told him everything?" His jaw clenched. For a moment, silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Then, softer than she expected, he said, "Because I need answers, too." The admission stunned her. Cassian Delacroix, the man who had mocked her, who had worn arrogance like a second skin, looked almost vulnerable. "What answers?" she pressed. He hesitated, then stepped closer. "About my father." "About what he's done. And about why. When you look at him, it feels like you're staring at the enemy of your own blood." Zariah's pulse quickened. He didn't know. Not yet. But soon he would. And when he did, the cracks in the Delacroix family would shatter into ruin. The mansion was too quiet that night, the kind of silence that felt staged, rehearsed, like even the walls were listening. Zariah slipped through the narrow servants' corridor, with the locket clenched in her palm. She had replayed Cassian's words over and over in her mind since the stables. He needed answers, she needed revenge, and for both, there was only one path forward. They had to work together. But trusting Cassian was a risk. He was still a Delacroix, blood of the man who had ruined her mother's life. Still the look in his eyes, the flicker of doubt, the bite of shame, hadn't been a lie. At least, she didn't think so. She found him in the library, leaning against one of the towering shelves with a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. His jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled to his elbows, his expression brooding under the low glow of the chandeliers. "You're following me now?" Cassian asked without looking up. Zariah stepped closer, unafraid. "I don't follow. I confront." That earned her a sharp glance, though his lips twitched at the edge as if he was fighting a smirk. "What do you want, Zariah?" Her voice was steady, though her pulse raced. "The truth, and your help getting it." Cassian swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his jaw tight. "And if I say no?" "Then you stay in your father's shadow, watching him rot this house from the inside out," she shot back. "But if you say yes, we burn him together." The words hung between them like a dare. For a moment, Cassian said nothing. His stare locked with hers, unreadable. Then he drained the glass in one swallow and set it aside. "Tell me what you know." They sat at the long mahogany table, her mother's letters spread out like contraband. Cassian read each word, his knuckles whitening the longer his eyes traced the lines. Finally, He shoved the last letter down. If this is true, my father didn't just manipulate people. He destroyed them. And he dragged your mother into it. Zariah's throat tightened. He didn't just drag her in. He ended her. Cassian's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Then he'll pay. The words should have comforted her, but there was something raw in the way he said it. Something that didn't sound like solidarity, but vengeance of his own. Why now? Zariah asked carefully. You've lived under his thumb your whole life. What's changed? He leaned closer, his eyes dark and stormy. You. The air shifted. Her breath caught as his gaze lingered on her lips for a fraction too long before he leaned back, breaking the tension. Zariah pushed the letters aside and stood. If you mean that, then prove it. Do something he can't ignore. The opportunity came quicker than expected. That weekend, Leopold hosted one of his infamous dinners, a gathering of elites who traded secrets as casually as they traded wine glasses. Servants lined the walls like shadows. Zariah moved between the tables with silent precision, pouring drinks, clearing plates, listening, always listening. She caught fragments of conversation, stock deals, political bribes, whispers of alliances sealed under the table. But her eyes found Cassian at the far end, sitting stiffly beside his father. He looked calm, but Zariah noticed the tightness in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed against his glass in agitation. Then, as the second course was served, Cassian stood abruptly. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice slicing through the chatter, "perhaps you should all know that the empire my father parades before you isn't as spotless as it seems." The room stilled. Forks froze mid-air. Leopold's head snapped toward him, eyes blazing. "Cassian!" But Cassian pressed on. "There are accounts, documents, names of people who were buried so this family could rise. And when the truth comes out, because it will, it won't just be whispers in the shadows anymore." A murmur rippled through the guests. Zariah's heart pounded. This was it. The first strike. Leopold rose slowly, his composure strained. "My son has had too much to drink. He speaks nonsense." But Cassian's gaze cut across the room, past the guests, past his father, straight to Zariah. For the briefest moment, it wasn't a performance. It was a promise. Later, chaos swirled as Leopold smoothed ruffled feathers, assuring his guests of his son's eccentricity. Cassian slipped into the servants' hall, and Zariah followed. She caught him by the sleeve, dragging him into an empty alcove. "You just painted a target on your back," she hissed. Cassian's lips curved into something dark, dangerous, and thrilling. "Good. Maybe now he'll know I'm not his pawn." She stared at him, torn between fury and admiration. "You're reckless." "And you're relentless," he countered, stepping closer. "It's why we might actually win." The space between them crackled. His nearness was intoxicating. Heat and defiance rolled into one. For the first time, Zariah let herself see him not as a Delacroix, not as the bully who once sneered at her, but as a man standing against his own blood, a man who might actually stand with her. Her chest rose sharply, breath catching. "Don't make me regret trusting you." Cassian leaned in, his voice low, meant for her ears alone. "Then don't stop." The morning after the dinner, the mansion hummed with tension. Servants whispered in corners, footsteps scurried faster than usual, and doors closed a little too quickly. Everyone had felt the shift. Cassian's defiance had not gone unnoticed, and Leopold's silence was more terrifying than his anger. Zariah kept her head down. But every step felt like walking on glass. She knew punishment was coming. The only question was when, and how cruel it would be. It didn't take long to find out. "Miss Monroe." The butler's voice was tight, formal, but his eyes flickered with pity. "The master wishes to see you." In the East Wing. The East Wing. Every servant knew what that meant. That wing wasn't just for guests. It was for corrections. Servants had come out of it limping, bleeding, broken in ways no one spoke about. Some never came out at all. Zariah lifted her chin. Fear clawed at her throat, but she refused to show it. She followed the butler through the marble halls until they stopped at a pair of tall double doors. Leopold waited inside. He stood near the window, back to her, hands clasped behind him. Sunlight spilled over his shoulders, casting his shadow long and sharp across the floor. "Do you know why you're here?" His voice was calm, too calm. Zariah stepped forward, refusing to cower. "Because I didn't bow." A low chuckle escaped him, though it held no humor. He turned, his eyes gleaming with cold fury. "You're clever, but clever doesn't save insolent girls in my house." He nodded once. Two of his enforcers, hulking men in black suits, appeared from the corners of the room. Before Zariah could react, one of them grabbed her arms, wrenching them behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulders, but she bit her tongue to keep from crying out. Leopold stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking softly against the marble. "I warned you once, Miss Monroe. In my house, disloyalty is disposed of." Her heartbeat thundered. She remembered her mother's words. The warnings in her letters. This was exactly what she had feared. But Zariah wasn't her mother. "You can break my body," she said through clenched teeth, "but you'll never own me." Leopold's smile was razor-thin. "We'll see." He raised his hand. The enforcer holding her shoved her to her knees. The first blow came hard, a backhand across her face that snapped her head to the side. Blood filled her mouth instantly, metallic and hot. She swayed but refused to fall. Another strike landed against her ribs, sharp and punishing. Pain exploded through her side, but still she glared up at him, eyes burning. "Still defiant," Leopold murmured, circling her like a predator. "Do you think my son will protect you? Cassian is a boy playing at rebellion. When the time comes, he will choose blood over you." "They always do." Zariah spat blood onto the marble floor. "Then you don't know your son as well as you think." Leopold's smile vanished. His hand lifted again, but the doors slammed open. "Enough!" Cassian's voice cut through the room like a blade. He strode inside, fury radiating off him in waves. His eyes locked on the sight of Zariah kneeling, bruised and bloodied, and something inside him snapped. "Father, stop this!" Leopold didn't move. His enforcers glanced uncertainly between them, waiting. "You dare interrupt me?" Leopold's voice was low, deadly. Cassian stepped closer, fists clenched. "You call this control? Beating a woman? A servant? You think this makes you strong? It makes you pathetic." Leopold's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Careful, boy. You stand on a knife's edge." Cassian's gaze flicked to Zariah, her split lip, her trembling shoulders, the fire still burning in her eyes. Then he turned back to his father. "Then let me fall." He lunged. Chaos erupted. Cassian tackled the enforcer nearest Zariah, fists flying. The man stumbled back, unprepared for the sheer force behind Cassian's blows. The second enforcer grabbed for him, but Zariah seized the moment. She drove her elbow into his gut with all the strength she had left. He grunted, releasing her long enough for her to scramble to her feet. "Run!" Cassian shouted. But Zariah didn't run. She snatched a silver candlestick from a side table and swung it hard into the enforcer's skull. The crack echoed through the room, and the man crumpled. Leopold's face twisted with rage. "Ungrateful wretch!" He lunged for her himself, his hand raised to strike. Cassian caught his wrist mid-air. For a moment, father and son stood locked in a deadly struggle, eyes burning into each other. Leopold's authority clashed with Cassian's defiance, and the air between them trembled. "You're done, father," Cassian growled, forcing his wrist back. You will never touch her again." With a roar, Leopold wrenched free, shoving Cassian back. The younger man stumbled but held his ground, chest heaving. Leopold looked between them, his bloodied son and the maid who refused to break. His face darkened with something colder than rage. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Not for either of you." Then he stormed from the room, his enforcers dragging themselves after him. The silence that followed was deafening. Cassian turned, breath ragged, eyes searching Zariah's battered face. He reached for her, then stopped, his hand hovering in hesitation. "Are you?" "I'm fine," she lied, wiping blood from her lip. But her voice cracked, betraying the truth. Cassian stepped closer, his tone fierce but trembling. "You're not fine. He could have—" Her eyes met his, blazing even through the pain. "But he didn't. Because of you." The words hung heavy, unspoken emotions thick in the air. For the first time, Zariah saw Cassian not as a Delacroix heir, not as the arrogant bully who once mocked her, but as a man who had chosen her over his father. And for the first time, Cassian saw Zariah not as a servant, not as a symbol of defiance, but as the one person who made him willing to stand against everything he'd ever known. Zariah had always believed that revenge was a fire you either fed or extinguished. Tonight she decided to feed it, but with Cassian's shadow walking dangerously close beside her. The ballroom was still buzzing from the chaos of Leopold's fury, the way his face had cracked like porcelain when she dared to stand her ground. Guests whispered behind diamond-gloved hands, servants darted nervously, and yet Zariah stood tall in her simple black maid's uniform, collar still straight despite the tug he'd given it earlier. She refused to bend, but now came the harder part: strategy. Cassian found her by the grand staircase, his jaw tight. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" His voice was low, urgent, but not cruel. He scanned the lingering guests, shielding her from view. "I defended myself," Zariah replied coldly, but her pulse betrayed her. "You humiliated him. In front of every investor, every family ally. Leopold will not let this go." Cassian's hand grazed her elbow, a protective gesture that startled her. "He's already plotting something." Zariah's lips curved, a smile half defiant, half wounded. "Good, because so am I." The words caught Cassian off guard. He leaned closer, searching her eyes. "Zariah, don't start a war you can't finish." Her laugh was bitter. "I've been at war since the day I put on this uniform. The only difference is tonight. I stopped fighting with silence." Cassian wanted to argue, but instead he felt that strange twist in his chest again. She wasn't weak. She wasn't a victim. She was a storm contained in a woman's frame, and if he wasn't careful, he would be swept into it willingly. Later that night, in the servants' quarters, Zariah spread a small stack of papers on the table. Blueprints, records, leverage she had stolen quietly over the years. Her plan was forming: expose the family's illegal dealings, dismantle their false empire, and make Leopold choke on his own greed. The creak of the door made her spin. Cassian stepped inside, closing it softly behind him. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "And yet, here I am," he said, eyes dropping to the papers. "You're planning something dangerous." "Dangerous men deserve dangerous ends," she shot back. Cassian walked closer, stopping just at the edge of her resolve. "If you go after him alone, he'll crush you. But if you let me in, maybe you'll have a chance." Zariah studied him. The billionaire heir, groomed for power, was offering partnership to a black maid society saw as disposable. Part of her screamed not to trust him. He carried the same name, the same blood as her tormentor. But another part, the quieter, braver part, wondered if this was the risk that would set her free. "Why?" she asked sharply. "Why would you betray your own father?" Cassian's throat worked. He looked away, ashamed. Because I've been betraying myself for years by staying silent. Leopold doesn't just bully staff, Zariah. He destroys everything he touches. Business partners, women, everything. For the first time, Zariah saw not just a billionaire's arrogance, but a man bleeding quietly in the shadows of someone louder, crueler. Her hand brushed against his on the table. Then we'll burn him together. The next day, the plan began. Zariah deliberately spilled wine on one of Leopold's prized suits during a luncheon, something she never would have dared before. He erupted, grabbing her wrist, raising his hand to strike, but Cassian stepped in swiftly, gripping his father's arm. The room froze. Enough. Father! Cassian's voice cut like steel. Do you realize how pathetic you look attacking the help in front of investors? Gasps rippled through the crowd. Leopold's face turned crimson, but Cassian didn't flinch. For the first time, he shielded her openly. Zariah's eyes locked with his. It was reckless, it was dangerous, but it was the first taste of alliance served hot in public view. That night, adrenaline still racing, Zariah cornered Cassian in the library. You risked everything back there, she said, voice trembling with something that wasn't just fear. I'd risk more, Cassian admitted, stepping closer, his breath warm against her skin. For you. The confession hung heavy in the room. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, torn between fury at his family name and the undeniable pull of his defiance. Before she could think, before she could stop herself, Zariah whispered, Then prove it. And in that moment, half alliance, half temptation, they crossed a line that neither of them could step back from. The Delacroix estate never truly slept. Even at midnight, chandeliers glowed in the hallways, guards patrolled the grounds, and the faint echo of clinking glasses drifted from private rooms where men in suits sealed deals over expensive scotch. But in the library, beneath the watchful eyes of portraits painted centuries ago, Zariah and Cassian sat shoulder to shoulder, whispering treason against the very blood that bound him and shackled her. On the table lay folders, copied ledgers, and incriminating contracts Zariah had quietly stolen over her years of servitude. Cassian leaned forward, scanning them with sharp eyes. This, he murmured, pointing to a ledger filled with coded transactions, is enough to ruin him. Offshore accounts, bribes, blackmail. If this got out, he would choke on his own empire, Zariah finished, her voice edged with satisfaction. Yet the satisfaction was laced with unease. This wasn't just her plan anymore. It was theirs. And that was dangerous. Cassian's gaze lingered on her instead of the papers. The lamplight traced the contours of her cheekbones, the defiance in her eyes, the way her hands trembled only when she thought no one was watching. You've been carrying this weight alone, he said softly. Zariah scoffed. No one cared enough to help. Until now. Her words were sharp, but they cut her too. Why was he helping? What did it mean that the only ally she had was a man with the same last name as the monster who had tormented her? Zariah, Cassian said carefully, I need you to understand something. This isn't about pity. I'm not here because I feel sorry for you. I'm here because you're right. Leopold is poison. And maybe I want to believe in someone braver than me. Her chest tightened, not from anger this time, but from a dangerous warmth that threatened to shatter her walls. The next morning, the plan moved into action. Zariah slipped copies of the documents into envelopes, one for a journalist, another for a board member Cassian trusted, and a third hidden away in case everything collapsed. Cassian arranged for a driver loyal only to him. But they didn't have to wait long for the first test. At breakfast, Leopold strutted into the dining hall, flanked by guests, his ego freshly inflated from a late-night deal. Zariah poured coffee into his cup, her movements deliberate, calm. Then, in one flawless motion, She pulled the chair out from under him just as he went to sit. Leopold crashed to the ground, his porcelain cup shattering, hot coffee staining his tailored suit. Gasps echoed around the room. A few guests even laughed, quickly silenced when Leopold roared like a beast. "You insolent!" He lunged for her, eyes wild. But before his hand could connect, Cassian stood, gripping Leopold's arm with iron force. "Touch her," Cassian growled, "and you'll regret it." The entire hall went still. For the first time, Leopold's authority cracked, not because of Zariah's defiance, but because Cassian had chosen her side in full daylight. Later, in the garden, Zariah cornered Cassian, fury and confusion colliding in her veins. "You can't keep doing that," she hissed. "Protecting me in front of everyone? It makes me a target." "It makes you untouchable," Cassian countered, his voice low and steady. "They'll think twice before laying a finger on you again." "And what about you?" she demanded. "You think Leopold won't come after you for humiliating him?" Cassian stepped closer, the air between them crackling. "Let him come. I'd rather bleed standing next to you than live another day in his shadow." Zariah's breath caught. Her anger faltered, replaced by something far more dangerous: longing. That night, as they met again to plan their next strike, the tension between them snapped. Zariah spread the final piece of evidence across the desk. Photos of women Leopold had silenced, receipts of hush money. Her voice shook. "This is it. This is how we end him." Cassian's hand covered hers, steadying it. "No. This is how we end him." Their eyes locked. All the bitterness, the distrust, the fire, they melted into a heat neither could deny. For the first time, Zariah allowed herself to lean into him, not as a servant seeking protection, but as a woman who had finally found someone willing to stand in the flames beside her. When his lips brushed hers, it wasn't tender. It was raw, fierce, a collision of revenge and forbidden desire. She should have pushed him away. Instead, she pulled him closer. And in that kiss, she knew. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding something new in the ashes. The storm broke faster than Zariah expected. Leopold had been humiliated too many times, and humiliation was something he could never forgive. By nightfall, his fury took shape. Security guards doubled. Servants whispered of punishments handed out in dark corners, and then the attack came, swift, merciless, and aimed directly at the only two people who dared defy him. Zariah was cornered first. She was carrying a tray down the marble hallway when two guards blocked her path. Their smiles weren't friendly. They were cruel, practiced. One of them muttered, "The boss says you need to learn your place." Her blood turned to ice, but her fists clenched. She wasn't the same trembling maid anymore. When the first guard reached for her, she reacted on instinct, slamming the tray into his face, the metal ringing out like a war drum. The second lunged, but she ducked, kicking his shin with sharp precision. They stumbled, and for a moment, she almost believed she could win, until Leopold himself appeared. He moved with that wolfish grin, clapping slowly as if her fight entertained him. "Fiery little thing, aren't you?" His eyes gleamed with malice. "You should have stayed silent, Zariah. That's what keeps girls like you alive." Zariah's chest heaved, her back pressed against the wall. She refused to look away, even as fear coiled in her gut. "Then kill me," she spat, "because I'll never bow again." Leopold's grin widened. "Oh, I won't kill you. That's too merciful. I'll make you regret every word you've ever said. You sure want to end up like your pathetic mother." He raised his hand, and Cassian stormed into the corridor. "Touch her, and you'll answer to me." His voice wasn't the calm restraint of before. It was raw, thunderous, vibrating with years of buried rage. Leopold turned, sneering. "You're siding with her? With her?" You'd throw away your bloodline for a maid? Cassian's jaw clenched. His fists curled. No, I'm throwing away you. They both collided like two storms. Cassian's punch landed first, the crack echoing down the hall. Leopold retaliated, fists flying, their brawl tearing through the polished perfection of the estate. Guards rushed in, but Zariah grabbed a fallen vase and smashed it against the nearest one, refusing to cower. Blood slicked Cassian's lip. Leopold's eyes swelled, his voice breaking with a roar. You've always been weak, Cassian. Always hiding behind ideals while I built empires. Cassian shoved him back, panting, his knuckles raw. You didn't build an empire. You built a cage, and tonight it burns. The fight ended when Zariah stepped between them, her voice slicing through the chaos. Enough, she shouted. Her body trembled, but her eyes were fire. This isn't just about families fighting. This is about every servant you beat, every woman you silenced, including my mother. You raped her on an official trip to Capri. She got pregnant and decided to expose you, but you silenced her. I don't have proof, but I sure do know how to start a rumor. And trust me, all the rumors are true. Every person crushed under your greed. You want me broken? Too late. You want him obedient? She pointed at Cassian. Too late. You've already lost. Leopold's chest heaved, rage choking him. For the first time, he had no words, no audience to clap for his cruelty, just silence and their defiance. The guards hesitated, uncertain, waiting for an order that never came. Because in that silence, Cassian pulled Zariah close. He kissed her, not in secret shadows this time, but in front of the very walls that had witnessed their torment. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was love, public, undeniable, and louder than Leopold's threats. I'm sorry, I didn't know he did that to your mother. How did you find out, though, since she died already? She told me before she died and shortly after she died. The room seemed to tilt around them. For the first time, Zariah didn't feel small. She didn't feel like a servant. She felt like a woman who had chosen her freedom, her voice, and the man willing to fight for both. Later, as they escaped into the night, bruised but unbroken, Cassian wrapped an arm around her. You realize, he murmured, half breathless, this means war. Zariah leaned into him, her smile faint but fierce. Then let's finish it together. He kissed her temple, his voice a vow. Together. And as the Delacroix mansion loomed behind them, trembling under the weight of its own rot, Zariah realized the truth. Revenge had brought them together. But love was what would let them survive it. The dawn broke crimson over the Delacroix estate, as though the sky itself bled for every sin buried inside its marble walls. By sunrise, the evidence had spread. The journalist Zariah trusted published the ledgers and contracts in bold headlines. Delacroix empire tainted by fraud, bribery, abuse. Phones buzzed with scandal, board members resigned, and police cars rolled up the manicured driveway. Leopold was dragged out in handcuffs, screaming promises of revenge. The man who once held the world in his palm now looked small, pathetic, a king stripped of his throne. Guests and investors who once bowed at his feet turned their backs, whispering, "How could we not have seen it?" Zariah stood in the courtyard, her uniform discarded, her posture unbroken. For the first time, she wasn't just a servant in the shadows. She was the woman who brought a dynasty to its knees. Cassian stood at her side, battered from the fight, but his hand clasped hers tightly. When the police van doors slammed shut behind Leopold, Cassian leaned in, voice low and steady. "It's over." Zariah exhaled, her shoulders finally releasing the weight she had carried for years. "No," she whispered, her eyes shining. "It's just beginning." Weeks later, the estate was sold. The servants, once silenced, received settlements and freedom. And Zariah? She didn't disappear into the background. She became the story, a symbol of defiance and dignity, a woman who turned her pain into power. Cassian walked away from the Delacroix name, choosing instead to rebuild something honest by her side. Together, they purchased a small townhouse far from the mansion's poison. It wasn't gilded or sprawling, but it was theirs, walls that held laughter instead of screams. On a quiet evening, Cassian cooked while Zariah lounged on the counter, teasing him about how a billionaire heir had learned to chop onions without cutting off a finger. He grinned, flicking water at her, his eyes softer than she had ever seen. "You know," he said, pausing with a crooked smile, "if someone told me months ago I'd be here, I wouldn't have believed it." Zariah leaned closer, pressing a kiss to his cheek. "Then believe it now. Because we're not just survivors. Cassian, we're free." And with that, the war was over. Not because they destroyed Leopold, though they had, but because they chose each other, in love and in defiance. The empire had fallen, but in its ashes, they built something better, something no one could ever take away. This wasn't just a story about revenge or wealth. It was about power reclaimed, about how a maid who was expected to bow low taught a dynasty what it meant to rise higher. Zariah's defiance became her weapon, Cassian's loyalty became her shield, and together they wrote an ending the world never saw coming. Love doesn't erase scars, but it makes the scars worth carrying. And sometimes, the greatest empire is not the one you inherit, but the one you build hand in hand with someone who chose you when the world tried to erase you. If you were in Zariah's shoes, standing against an empire that had humiliated and broken you, would you risk everything for revenge, even if it meant finding love in the most unlikely place? Or would you walk away in silence? Thank you for joining me in this wild, controversial, and emotional journey. If this story gripped you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another billionaire romance full of twists, betrayals, and unexpected love.